Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research at the University of Saskatchewan. I also run the SURE program, Student to Undergraduate Research Experience. And today we have Brock Egeto with us. Brock, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. You can correct that when it's time.
Very close.
Brock is with us, and he will be talking about top CVs, cover letters, and things that you need to do in order to capture that job interview. And Brock, with that, over to you.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, it's Brock Egeto. You were very close.
Thanks, Brock.
I'm an employment coordinator at the Student Employment and Career Center. I've been there for about 6 years, and in my role there, I work a lot with employers and students, and my position is really about connecting those two groups to each other around recruitments and understanding what employers are looking for, as far as their top talents, how they approach their recruitment processes, understanding optimal ways to create your resume and cover letter, LinkedIn profile, and how they approach interviewing and all those sorts of things. And so then we go and we summarize all that information that we gather from employers, and then we go out and present to students about the best ways to approach recruitment. And as well as offering programs through the Student Employment and Career Center, which we're continuing to do now remotely. So we do WebEx appointments on resumes and cover letters, career coaching. We do mock interviews through WebEx as well. So all that's continuing to go on, and that services are available to students and alumni. And so what I'm going to be talking about here today, I'm going to look at, we're going to go through resumes, cover letters, and I'm going to touch a little bit on CVs and mostly about what the difference is between a CV and a resume. So I just have to share my screen here. Hopefully I can do that. Okay. And where's my presentation? And give me 1 second while I figure out how to actually, I always forget how to play it. There we go. Okay, so.
Looks great, Brock.
Can see it okay? Okay, so I'm going to be giving you a lot of tips here, kind of coming fast and furious. Quite a bit of content to cover. I'm going to get through it hopefully fairly quickly, though, and leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. Usually people have little specific things that they'd like to ask about in the preparation of cover letters and resumes and all that sort of thing. And even we can talk a little bit, this stuff to the general recruitment and how all this fits together as well, if you like. But for this session here, this is going to be the main focus. So we're going to look at, the understanding the purpose and the structure of the cover letter and its role in applying for your jobs. We're going to talk about understanding the difference between 3 different formats of resume and understanding which of those 3 formats is going to be most appropriate for the particular job that you're applying to and related to your own experience as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit again at the end just about the differences between a resume and CV in the Canadian context. Those 2 terms, they're often used interchangeably, but there are specific contexts in which we would talk about a CV, especially in Canada, and especially for university students on campus, and especially students like yourselves in the SURE program. So let's get rolling here. So just to start off with, I find really important to just reflect on what the purpose really is of these documents and how to make them work for you. Really, your job search documents, it's about your opportunity to present yourself, your best self, to a potential employer in order to get to that next stage of the recruitment process, which is the interview. And so really the ideal way to approach this is to really tailor these documents very specifically to the company that you're applying to the position that you're applying to, and the kind of work that you're going to be doing, hopefully, in that position, and really selling what you feel your particular strengths are, tying those skills, those abilities, your knowledge back to that job posting that you're reflecting in these documents. Okay, so let's go to the next one here. Oh, another thing that's really, really important to point out and for everybody to keep in mind when they're creating these documents is that they really are a very important of your written communication skills. Um, it's one of the top most important skill sets that any employer in any industry is looking for, especially in professional work. They want to know that you can write and communicate clearly through the written word. So very important to take your grammar, spelling, all that stuff very seriously. Okay. Oh. So I like to encourage anybody creating their resumes and cover letters, their applications, to start off by doing a bit of inventory taking. And so that means doing a bit of reflecting on, your past work experience, volunteering experience, the skill sets or competencies that you've developed through those experiences, as well as through your education. Um, Thinking about more broadly your qualities or abilities, your characteristics of who you are, what makes you unique, what makes you that strong potential candidate for any type of professional jobs that you're going to be looking for, or any jobs that you're looking for. So think about all that work experience, volunteer experience, think about your education. Um, you're going to want to be thinking about the evidence that you need in order to back up when you say you have written communication as a skill set, or that you're a leader, or that you have the leadership capacity. You want to think, what is the evidence that I have to prove that through these documents to a potential employer? So you're going to ideally want to pull that from work experience, volunteer experience, school, wherever you can. So you can think broadly. Thinking about your education, you're going to be doing presentations, group projects. You might be involved in clubs, student groups, teams. You're doing report writing and data analysis in your classes. As a student, you have to manage your time and set goals. All those things are important transferable skills to any potential job. So you can pull from that student experience to really give that evidence for those things. Um, Another thing to keep in mind when you're going through this here, I think it's always really important to keep in the back of your mind, what are your long-term career goals and intermediate career goals as well, and see how that story flows together, because that's going to be something that an employer is probably going to want to hear. If you get to that interview stage, and it's going to maybe come across a little bit in your cover letter as well, they're going to want to hear how this connects to your long-term and short-term career goals. They want somebody who's going to come into this position who's committed to being there and has a reason to want to be there, because those are going to be the best employees. So start off with taking an inventory, and then you're going to, most often, 95% of the time, you're going to be applying to a job posting. So taking those job postings very seriously. A lot of people really just kind of skim over a job posting and kind of get a general idea of what they're looking for, and maybe just use their standard resume and standard cover letter, and just tweak the company name or maybe a few little things in there. But it's really important that you put a little bit more effort into customizing those documents. We'll talk about how and where that's even more important. But thinking about that job posting, I really encourage everybody to save a copy of the job posting, save it on your computer, print it off, whatever it is. You want to keep it around. One reason being that if you do get an interview, you're going to want to go back to that job posting and reread it a few times so that you know it inside and out. But also, you're going to want to go through that job posting before writing your resume and underline all those keywords that are describing their ideal candidate. So the skill words, the competencies, abilities, your characteristics that they're looking for, the knowledge and education, experience, responsibilities, past responsibilities that you've got from work experience. Think about what those most important things are that they are highlighting. And that then is what you're going to want to speak to as much as possible in your cover letter and your resume. And an important thing to, I guess, realize about job postings is that often you're looking at it and you think, well, I don't have that, or I don't have that. So maybe I don't have the 5 years experience that they're looking for. That's okay if you feel that you have most of what they are looking for. it's important to realize that a job description typically is describing the ideal candidate. And rarely do you ever get the ideal candidate coming your way. So don't be put off if you don't have everything that they say that they are looking for. Focus on what the most important things that you think they are looking for, especially those skill sets, that knowledge, and just make sure that you're really speaking to those things and persuading them that you have that all those areas that they're looking for. So really paying attention very closely to the job posting is going to be very important for you. So I talk a lot about skill sets. I mean, it's kind of the core of the job search, and finding an appropriate candidate who's going to be successful for you. You really think very deeply about the kinds of skills that you want in this position and in the candidate. And so we talk about basically two different areas of skills. So there's the soft skills, often called transferable skills. So things like professionalism or work ethic, teamwork and collaboration, that's a big one. Obviously, oral and written communication, very, very important. Critical thinking is very important. Leadership, especially as you get later into your career, becomes more and more important. Adaptability is something that in many jobs is becoming more important than ever. The workplace is shifting so fast, as we've seen with this whole pandemic thing. People have had to pivot in their jobs, learn new things, learn new technology, and the ability to do that well on your own. That's something that employers are absolutely looking for as a key skill set. Other things like interpersonal skills, empathy, very important. Time management and organization, always very, very important. And that last one there, attitude, enthusiasm, and passion. It's maybe not a skill per se, but it is one of the most important things that a hiring manager or a hiring committee is looking for in a potential candidate. They want somebody who really genuinely wants to be there. So it's important that you try to get that across in various ways. The other side of it is the hard skills. So those industry or job specific skills related to the discipline that you are studying at university. So things like data analysis, copywriting, accounting and finance, web development, design, marketing, nursing, teaching, technical reporting, research. Any of those things are what you would call hard skills. And so every different job that you're going to be applying to, they're going to have different hard skills that they probably want to see in their candidate. The soft skills, on the other hand, many of them apply to any job that you're going to be, seeking. So very important to have a good understanding of what both your soft and hard skills are. And again, coming back to thinking about what is the evidence that you have to prove that you have those different skill sets. Another really important thing as you're creating these documents is doing your research and really understanding that employer and that industry as well. So, maybe this is something that's, you already have a lot of this knowledge, this is your discipline, this is your, but at the very least, you still want to make sure that you are doing some more in-depth research on that particular employer. So checking out their website, looking at their about page, really understanding what it is that they do, what their mission, their values are, that sort of thing. Maybe checking out their Wikipedia page, see if there's any recent news about, can give you a broader picture of what's going on in their world right now. All that stuff is going to be very, very important. It's mostly going to come across in the interview, but it's going to hopefully come across in your cover letter a little bit as well if you're doing it in a really strong way. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. So yeah, I don't know if I have to say much more about this. Oh, another place to look, check out LinkedIn. LinkedIn can be very helpful. You can look at some of the current employees that are working there, maybe in similar positions as you, and you can look at their profile, what they've written for their job description. That will give you just a little bit more insider knowledge that can be helpful as well. And if you can connect with anybody at the company, if you have friends there, or you just want to reach out to somebody through LinkedIn to ask them some specific questions about the organization or this type of work, that can be a very good thing to do as well. You may not always get a response, if you're reaching out to somebody through LinkedIn to ask those questions. It's important to personalize any of those messages. but when they do respond, it can be very helpful for you. So yeah, just make sure that you are really doing some serious research, because they will often, especially in an interview, ask you a very direct question like, tell us what you know about our company. So you need to be able to respond to that well. So cover letter. Basically, it's a one-page document, accompanies your resume. Try not to ever have it go beyond one page. One page is standards. If you're going beyond that, you probably need to learn to just be a little bit more concise. Really think back to that job posting and what the most important skill sets or qualities are that they are looking for, and speak mostly to those, as opposed to giving a very broad overview of what you have to offer. Structure of the cover letter. Maybe I'll just jump ahead. I thought I had a picture. Actually, what I'm going to do. Okay, hopefully I don't screw this up. I want to flip to. No, do that. How do I unshare? Oh, sorry. That was not the right thing to do at all. So I want to point out to everybody the Students at USask website, where we have guides on all these documents. And I just want to give you some examples of what good documents look like. So yeah, again, students.usask.ca, there's a job section here. If you click on that, there's a resumes and CVs page. So if you go there, we have a resume guide, a cover letter guide, and a CV guide, which will all be very helpful for you, seeing really strong formatting and structuring of these kinds of documents. So I want to go to the cover letter guide first, and because it gives you a better picture of what the letter looks like. And so what you'll see, it's basically standard business letter format. You've got your contact information up top. Really just, you need maybe your city and province, phone number, email address. You don't need to give street address or anything like that. It's not super necessary. Date, company contact information. I would always include what's called ray line. This is where you identify what the job is that you're applying to. If there's a job posting ID, I would attach that as well. So like number A875, just so that if it's going into the company systems, it's making sure that it's going to the correct person or correct place. It's not getting lost or mixed up with some other kind of job. The address, so here it says, Dear Miss Reynolds. Whenever possible, try to get the actual person's name. Often that is not possible, in which case I would put something like Dear Hiring Committee or Dear Hiring Manager. I just encourage people not to use that generic language of to whom it may concern or Dear Sir, Madam. And only because it just sounds like very generic, template-y language that you pulled off a Google search document. So again, yeah, Dear Hiring Manager, that works perfectly fine. And then the body of the cover letter itself, usually it's like 3 to 4 paragraphs. First paragraph, that's where you're going to introduce what it is about this company and this position that's really particularly of interest to you. This is where doing your research is going to really help make this strong. So if you can tie it to something very specific to that organization, something that resonates with you about them, that's going to grab their attention. That's going to look really good. Try not to be too generic. I've seen people basically just pull off, on an about page, a statement, a sentence that was describing the company, and they just pop it in there. They know that you've done that. That's kind of lazy. Try to personalize it a little bit more and think about what it is about that company or that position that really resonates with you. And then you're going to hit off some of those highlights, right? So talking about your education as is relevant, talking about some potential past work experience. Again, that's the super relevant stuff, the stuff that's most connected to the skill sets and experience that they are looking for, really just honing in on that most important information. And so maybe the two middle paragraphs really focus on that sort of thing. So those skills and experience. And then the last paragraph there, it's kind of just wrapping it up, putting a summary on who you are as a potential candidate, why you're super interested in working for their company specifically, and, the standard, you may reach me at the above telephone number or email or something like that. I'm looking forward to hearing from you and discussing further my qualifications or however you want to word that. Pretty standard language for that last paragraph. And then just signing off with a sincerely, kind of something like that. Professional language there. Your name. And some people will throw in a digital signature. So, you can write that on your iPad or, write it on a piece of paper, scan it into the computer and pop it in there. All it really does is just put a little polish on it. It's not super necessary by any means. See down here, it says enclosures, resume letters of recommendation, that sort of thing. That's not super important, especially if you're applying online and it's maybe all in one document, all in PDF. They'll see what's enclosed when they print it off. So that's not super important to have there. So that's all there really is to say about the cover letter. Let me go back to my, if I can find it. Now, what did I do with it? There we go. It's not super complicated. It takes time though to do really well, and you want to do it really well. You don't want to be giving them what's I call a template or generic cover letter, where it's very clear again that you just flipped in and out the position title and the company name, and everything else has probably stayed the same from job to job that you've applied to. It's really, really obvious when a candidate has done that. And often, if that's the case, you just don't take it all that seriously. You might just toss it into the recycling bin, especially if you got 50 resumes sitting in front of you. So you really want to try to personalize that document. People do ask, like, do employers actually read cover letters? Yes, they do. Different companies have different, processes through which they go through their reviewing their hiring process. Some of them might not immediately read it. Maybe they're just looking at the qualifications that have been identified in your resume first, kind of weed down their stack. But then once they've got their long list or short list, they're probably going to that cover letter and checking out your written communication skills, seeing if you're genuinely interested and if you put that extra effort into showing that. That's going to be important at that point. So I think I talked about all of those things there. So that's it for cover letters. I guess at the end, keep in mind if you have any questions, and we can come back to it at the end. So let's move on to resumes. Resumes, typically 2 to 3 page documents, not often more than that, especially if you're being concise and really only including the experience that is relevant. You don't need to include everything you've ever done on a resume. Again, cut out that kind of superfluous information. So if you're applying to a professional position and you worked at Walmart in the past, maybe they don't really care about that. You can just cut that off and that's fine. Especially, I find that 2 pages tends to be enough. As you get a little bit later in your career, or you've developed a lot of relevant work experience, maybe you're going on to that 3rd page and it's getting a little bit longer. Most students, they're probably fine with a 2-page document. So I'm going to talk about 3 different styles of how to format your resume for different purposes. So there's a chronological, functional, and combination style resume. So the chronological style resume, that's really when you have a lot of very relevant work experience and you want to talk about that work experience. So a lot of the space on the document on your resume is going to be getting into the details of those different jobs, what you did there, the skills that you developed, the projects that you worked on, the achievements that you had, that really important high-level stuff that really showcases, again, your skill sets and your experience and your abilities. And then in addition to that, very full work experience section. Maybe you're going to have a highlights of qualifications up top. That's maybe 4 or 5 points. That just, again, highlights qualifications. It's the most important stuff. Maybe it's your education there, getting into a little bit more detail about it. Key skill sets, key work experience, and that's really it's what you would basically put into a summary statement of who you are, like what you might see on a LinkedIn profile. That's how you would want to approach your highlights qualifications. So the functional style resume, it's kind of the opposite in a way. So if you do not have a lot of relevant work experience, that's okay. You can still apply for jobs. It's just a different way of showcasing your experience, your skill sets. And so the main difference is, rather than highlights of qualifications, you're going to be doing a summary of skills section. And so you're going to get into different skill areas and get into a lot of detail about what those skills are. And it's going to be a very limited work experience section. And I'm actually going to go again. Why can I never hide the screen? Let's try this. There we go. I'm going to go to the resume guide and just show you some examples of what those two different documents look like. So here's the chronological resume. You see up here the highlights, qualifications. It's often the first section on the resume. This one's just got 5 points, again, hitting off those most important aspects of who you are. Work experience down here, getting into a lot more detail about that work experience and what you were doing in those jobs and the skills that you were developing. Education, especially for a professional job, it's either going to be this second section here, or it might even be the first one, because the education is obviously going to be very important. So the contrast to that, the functional style resume, summary of skills section here. So the way to approach this is to think again about that job posting. Think about the main skill areas that they're looking for. So it might be something like leadership, maybe it's communication, maybe it's research, technical skills, it's counting maybe, whatever it might be. And so you're going to set out those skill headings, and then underneath them, you're going to get into some bullet points, really digging into the detail of that skill area and specific competencies that you have. And again, to really trying to pull the evidence for those competencies. So the way to structure this is to start off ideally with a verb or an action word. So like this one here, you probably can't read it, but refined written, listening, and oral communication skills through academic writing, group projects, and community service. So the refined, what that's doing is it's encouraging you to speak to something that you've actually done, as opposed to just what you're capable or you think you're capable of doing, and then getting into those skill words and then providing that evidence. So in this one, it's speaking to community service work and education. That's the source of that evidence. So again, if you don't have a lot of relevant work experience, that's the best way to approach writing your resume. Then the work experience section, I mean, if it's really not relevant, all you have to do is, McDonald's is a good example here. Supervisor and team leader, McDonald's restaurants, the location and the dates. Don't need to get anything more than that, because it's not super relevant. It might still be important to show that you've had work experience, and in this case, there's a bit of a leadership experience there as well. But you don't need to get into the duties and responsibilities of that. Anything that's super important, it's going to get worked up here into the summary of skills section. So like this statement down here, where it says organize staffing schedules and manage production capacity for 50 employees at McDonald's, et cetera, et cetera. So that experience, it makes more sense to get pulled up here under the leadership section. So that's a better way of approaching that. Okay, let's now find my presentation again. And there we go. Okay. And then the combination style resume, basically what that is, it's when you want to highlight all those skills in that detail, like on the functional style resume, but you still have some relevant work experience that you would also like to elaborate on. So this is the combination style resume is a very common one that a lot of people use just because they want to highlight those things in two different ways. So that works fine as well. Couple things to keep in mind when you're writing the bullet points, especially in the summary of skills section. This is a little blue text here. Try to highlight what you have done. So I already kind of mentioned that, but it is really important to avoid those generic and cliche statements like this point down here, saying that you're a strong communicator or that you work well independently or in a team. Those are kind of statements that they're very common on resumes, but they're sort of meaningless. Anybody can say them. It's not backed up by any specific evidence. It's not, specific to you as a person. So try as much as possible to avoid those and bring that evidence in and talk about what you've actually done. You might not be able to do it with every single point, but the more you can do it, the more persuasive and effective that document is going to be, and the better written those points will be. Yeah, I mean, here's just some examples of strong ways to write these things, these points. Here, maybe I'll just read this last one here. So maintain positive collaborative relationships with internal and external stakeholders to effectively coordinate a 2-day conference on environmental engineering. So there's that evidence, that 2-day conference. That's a big deal. But obviously there's important skill sets that you would have demonstrated there. So building those collaborative relationships with internal and external stakeholders, and just the effective coordination. And then starting the whole thing off with the maintained word there, that action word. Very, very well written statement there. It says a lot about what you did there and about what you're capable of doing. So that's a strong way of writing your skill statements. So just really quickly, other potential resume headings you might see. So sometimes people will break out their work experience into different sections. So maybe you have a related or relevant work experience section, and then maybe a supplementary work experience where it's not super relevant, but maybe there's something about it that's really important that you kind of want to just point to. So thinking about that McDonald's example there as a team leader, you're not writing anything about it, but you are putting that you are a supervisor and team leader at McDonald's, because it does point towards your having had leadership experience and that you can, handle responsibility. So might not be super relevant to the job, but you still want to include it some way. So supplementary work experience section is probably the way to do it. Volunteer experience, community involvement, another important type of section. A lot of employers really very highly value that you are involved in your community, that you volunteer, that you give back in some way. It says a lot about your character. And so talking to employers, they often point out just how much they like to see that sort of thing. So if you don't have a lot of volunteer community involvement, I always suggest people go out there and get some. It is also a way of developing skill sets that you might not develop through your paid jobs that you're doing. And it's nice to give back to the community as well. Sometimes scholarships and awards that might be relevant. Kind of just depends. You use your discretion on that one. Memberships and professional associations, if it's relevant again. University involvement, campus activities, it's kind of related back to the volunteer experience and community involvement. Similar, just more campus focused. So that's a nice thing to see on there. If you're involved in, student associations, campus clubs, that sort of thing, that looks good as well. Extracurricular activities, somewhat related to that as well. Interests and activities, that's kind of an optional section to include on your resume. What I like about it is that it allows you to give a bit more holistic picture of who you are as a person. So you might talk about how you play rec soccer, or that you play in the church bands, or you enjoy hiking, whatever it might be. Again, it's just a bit more well-rounded picture of who you are. Sometimes it's a way of highlighting something that you can't highlight anywhere else, that maybe is in some way relevant. So I've seen people highlight sports involvement there, which kind of pointed towards a coaching ability or working with youth. And that was in some way relevant to the job that they were applying to. It can also just be a way for the interviewer to potentially get some icebreaker conversation. They might ask you first about your interests and your activities and what you do for fun. So that's nice to have on there as well, if you have the room. And then last, references. Quickly, you're going to want to have a list of 3 references. You don't necessarily have to include them on the resume when you're submitting it, unless they say explicitly that references must be included, and sometimes they do. Otherwise, you just provide them at the interview, and that's fine. It's important, though, to think about who you're using as your references and what they can say about you. So the best references really are people who can speak to your work ethic, your general attitude, how you get along or work with other people, and then as well speaking about some of your skills and your abilities, particularly if it can tie to that job that you're applying to. So these are things that you can maybe talk about in the interview. You can sell yourself on this, but before anybody's going to hire you, they're probably going to want to hear it from a third party. So the better your reference can talk about those things, that is key for you. One thing I always recommend everybody does, if you get an interview, beforehand, contact your references, give them a copy of your cover letter and resume that you use to apply. Ideally, give them a copy of the job posting as well, so that they can prepare themselves for that reference call. If they have those documents in front of them, they can think about it a little bit beforehand. They're going to give a far better reference. And even if you can give them some additional tips of things that they might want to talk about, that can be very, very helpful. So I recommend you do that every single time, and not everybody. Often people don't do that, so it's a little top tip there that you should remember. Yeah, references might change depending on the job that you're applying to. It kind of goes without saying. And references can go beyond your past employers. They can include professors, colleagues sometimes, maybe people from volunteer experiences. Often, like a supervisor is going to be, one of your strongest references. Often employers will ask for a supervisor. So if you can, try to get one. Colleagues can be quite good as well. Sometimes they're better than a supervisor, especially if they work more closely with you, if they can speak to your skill sets and your work ethic even better than a supervisor. So maybe you didn't work all that closely with a supervisor. So colleagues can be a very strong reference, and sometimes volunteer people that you worked with can be very, very good as well. And if you have a strong relationship with a professor, you can approach a professor to see if they might potentially want to provide a reference to you, especially if, again, they can speak to things like your work ethic and your knowledge and that sort of thing. Okay, so here on resumes and CVs, going to try to wrap this up soon. So in different places, resumes and CVs are used in different ways, but in Canada, typically a resume is a document that I just talked about where it's probably 2 to 3 pages. It doesn't include everything you've ever done. It's just the most relevant stuff. CV often is a longer document. It can be many, many pages in length, but it's used in very specific places. So it's, in medicine, they always require CVs, teaching positions, academic positions, research positions. They all generally require a CV. Sometimes performing studio art positions is another place that CVs asked for. It is somewhat common, though, to hear people use these interchangeably. So, if you see CV, but it's kind of just like a typical job, they might just probably mean a resume. And if they say resume, but it's an academic position that you're applying for, probably they want a CV. So CV, it looks very similar to a resume, but it's going to have a lot of additional categories, and it's going to have more information. So things that would be on a CV would include like research interests, your research experience, professional experience, teaching experience, publications, especially as you get later in your career. Some CVs take up 5 pages just listing the publications, and that's what a CV should do. conferences, presentations, posters. So if you're presenting at a conference, doing a poster presentation, that may be something you would include as well. Again, relevant professional associations and memberships is something that you probably want to have on there, and as well honors and grants that you've received. That's a very important thing to include on your CV. And I think that's all I really have to say about CVs. And then just a question here that we often get, and I already kind of spoke to it, but people say, do I have to change my cover letter or my resume or my CV for every job that I apply to? I say yes, you do. Depending. The cover letter, at the very least, please make sure that you are always spending some time to really personalize that document. The resume and the CV, if you're applying to very similar jobs, it might not change much. In some cases, it might not change at all. But you want to make sure that you are speaking to those top skill sets that they have identified as being important. So it might mean that maybe you work with a couple of different resumes. And it just depends on the type of job that you're applying to. You use it for this one or that one. But again, that cover letter, really make sure that you're tailoring that every single time. I think that's all I had to say about that. Just a couple notes on the actual just applying process. Obviously, these days, mostly it's applying through email or through some kind of online system. Always convert your documents from Word to PDF. Just make sure that the formatting doesn't get all thrown out of whack when somebody opens it, because it can really screw things up if they open up on a different version of Word or some other program. So just convert to PDF, locks the formatting in. You can combine as well all of your documents into one PDF. If the hiring manager is printing them off, it just makes their lives easier. So you can do that. If you're emailing the application, as far as email etiquette, a few things in the subject line. You have to really use, the job that you're applying to, and maybe your name. That's enough for the subject line. You don't have to copy and paste your cover letter and resume into the body of the email. In fact, don't do that. It can be a very short little message there, something along the lines of, please find attached my application for this position. Maybe it's your contact information, something like that. It doesn't have to be very much there. And yeah, again, ideally just put it all into one PDF. Just makes their lives easier. Summarizing the whole thing here, lastly, tailor cover letter for every job that you apply to. Avoid having it sound like a template letter. Speak to the skills, the knowledge, and the experience identified in the job posting. Speak very specifically to what they're looking for. If you are lacking in relevant experience, focus on your skills. And as well, go out there and try to find experience wherever you can, volunteering, extracurricular, whatever it might be. And then again, look at using that functional style resume. Also consider creating a LinkedIn profile. It's basically like your online resume or CV. Just make sure you put in the effort to polishing it up, get a nice professional photo on there. And then if you do that, you can take your LinkedIn URL and attach it with your other contact information on your resume and your cover letter as well, so that they know that they can go and find that there. You can consider following up by phone after applying. I'd give it, a couple of days at least, if you have a number that you can call. If you do intend to do that, you don't have to do it, but it can be a nice thing to do as a way of just really emphasizing your genuine, deep interest in wanting to work for them in that position. If you do that, aim for about a 5-minute phone call, make some notes beforehand of questions that you would like to ask, thoughtful questions, not just things that can be answered by reading the websites or reading the job posting. Got to go a little bit deeper than that. And a few things that you might want to highlight about yourself. And again, aim for a 5-minute call with, at the same time, understanding that maybe they're interested and maybe they want to talk to you for a little bit longer. I've heard of the calls going half an hour, 45 minutes sometimes. So maybe have your resume handy as well, just as a little reference for yourself. Go a little bit longer and you can make notes and that sort of thing also. And then, yeah, again, our programming in the Student Employment and Career Center, sign up for a resume talk. We do resume talks by email. We can just give you email feedback. We can do it by phone or we can do it by WebEx. So that could be really helpful. Ideally, a copy of a job posting that you're applying to as well, just so that we can make sure that you're doing a good job of tailoring those documents to that specific job posting. So those are your top tips there at the end. Last note, which I always mentioned it last time as well, social media. You got to be really careful. Employers at some point in the hiring process are going to be Googling you. They're going to check out your Facebook if they can, Twitter, your Instagram, maybe whatever's out there. They're gonna do a search. So if you're any way concerned, put your privacy settings at least really high so that they can't find you or they don't see very much at all. Or just make sure that the content that you have on there is all clean and good and doesn't set off any potential red flags for them. So be very, very aware of your online presence. It's super, super important. And I think that leads us into questions. So I will stop sharing my screen and come back. Yeah. So do we have any questions?
If anyone has any questions, you can drop it into the chat and either Brock and I can pick it up and say it out loud. If you want to unmute yourself and ask Brock the question, you can do it that way as well. While the chat goes on, I'm actually going to stop the recording. Brock, thank you very much. I will stop the recording, but the chat will go on from here.